Before we take the tunnel off of the layout, however, what we're going to do is take a Sharpie marker and go along the outside edge here and just trace the shape of the tunnel. Just like that. And just do it for the entire length of the tunnel. Okay, the tunnel is off the layout again, and what we're going to do is just make sure that the section of track that's going to be covered by the tunnel is ready to be covered by a tunnel, because once that tunnel goes on, we're not going to have easy access to that track again. The first thing you want to check, of course, is the electrical situation. You want to make sure that you've fixed any electrical problems before the tunnel goes on. If you're using TMCC or DCS, make sure you've got good signal and that you've resolved any signal problems before the tunnel goes on. If you're doing any special wiring hookups like track blocks or ITADs or stuff like that, make sure you've got those hooked up and working and that you've fixed any problems before the tunnel goes on. Because if you try to fix any electrical problems after the tunnel is in place, it's going to be a royal pain in the butt. The next thing we need to do is check to make sure we've ballasted everywhere that needs ballast. Now, I've already ballasted my track, but I still need to fill in this gap here so that the table doesn't show through. And I also need to ballast on either side here to fill in these gaps, because remember, this Sharpie line represents the tunnel wall, so I need to fill this in so that the table doesn't show through. Now, the reason I had you draw this Sharpie line is because now all I have to do is make sure I ballast all the way out to that Sharpie line, and that will ensure that when I put the tunnel back on, the ballast runs all the way to the tunnel wall and we won't have any gaps. Alternatively, if you're not using ballast, or if you're using a track system like RealTrax or FasTrax, where there's not real ballast involved, you could also just fill this area in with black paint. It's up to you, but the point is, you just don't want the raw table showing through. The next thing you'll want to do is take care of any weathering of the track and ballast that you plan to do before the tunnel goes on. Okay, as you can see, I've laid down all the ballast that needs to be laid down, and I've weathered the track as much as I want to weather it. So now we're ready to put the tunnel back on. But before we do that, the last thing we want to do is do a thorough cleaning of the work site. I'm going to take a vacuum and go over all the track and ballast and suck up any dirt and debris that may be there. I'm going to do a close inspection of all the track, make sure there's nothing impeding the track, nothing that's going to interfere with the trains. And then the last thing I'm going to do is go over the track with a cleaning solution and clean the tops of the rail and get them nice and shiny. Okay, I've done all the cleanup work, so now let's go ahead and put this tunnel back on for the last time. Just like that, and get it right in position. Okay, with the tunnel in place, let's go ahead and do another quick clearance test, just to make sure we've got it in the right spot. Okay, the clearance looks okay, so let's go ahead and start securing this tunnel down. The first measure that we're going to do to hold this tunnel in place is to go along the outside edge of the tunnel and put a little bead of hot glue underneath the edge of the tunnel. And then we'll press the tunnel down and wait till it dries. And that'll be our first thing that'll hold this tunnel in place. It's not the only thing we're going to do. The final step is going to be to use some more of this foam and put it along the side to seal it to the table and block out any light that's coming through the bottom. But this first step is just to kind of hold it in place for that second step so it doesn't shift around. So I'm just going to go right along the edge here and just put a little bead of glue. And then just kind of hold it down if I need to until that glue sets. And we're going to do that all down this way and all down the other side. Okay, I finished putting the bead of glue on both sides of the tunnel, so our next step will be to make some more of that window screen foam that we made earlier. We're going to cut it into little strips and use it to secure the tunnel down to the table. And at the same time, those strips will also block out any light that's coming through the bottom edge of the inside of the tunnel. Here I've made another piece of window screen foam, and what we're going to do is cut this into little strips and then use those strips to secure the bottom of the tunnel, and that will block any light from getting in the bottom of the tunnel. But before we do that, what we're going to do is paint one side black. To paint one side black, we're just going to use some black acrylic paint. And we'll just squirt a little bit on here. And just paint it black. You're probably wondering why we're doing this. Well, it'll make a little more sense when I explain it at the tunnel. But basically, we're painting one side black so that when you look inside the tunnel, you don't see any of this color poking through the bottom of the tunnel. We don't want any of this beige color ruining the perfect rocks we've put in the tunnel. So we're painting this side black so that when we secure it to the bottom of the tunnel, it'll just be black and not beige. Okay, let's give that just a few minutes to dry, and then we'll cut it into strips and put it on the tunnel. Okay, I've let the paint dry enough so that we can handle it, and I've gone ahead and cut this piece of window screen foam into little 1-inch strips. So let's take these out to the layout and put them on the tunnel. Okay, here we are at the tunnel, and all we're going to do is we're going to put the hot glue on the black side of the foam strip. And just get good coverage with the glue. And then just turn it over and squish it down between the table and the bottom of the tunnel. And if your foam strips have already hardened up a little bit because you had to paint and let the paint dry, don't worry, the hot glue will reheat the foam and it'll soften up again enough for you to bend it and get it in place. And there we go, that's all there is to it. So we're going to do the same thing for the entire length of the tunnel. Okay, I've glued down all the little strips of foam along the outside of the tunnel, and now this thing is nice and sturdy. It's not going anywhere. And it's very strong. You may not think it's strong from the materials that were used, but this is a 5-pound bag of ballast, and it sits up there just fine. Doesn't hurt anything. So this is a nice strong tunnel. And you'll notice because we used that foam on the bottom edge of the tunnel on the outside and we painted it black, if you look in the tunnel, you can no longer see any light coming through the bottom edge of the tunnel. So the last thing we have to do is just put this tunnel portal on the front, and then we're all done.